by going to see someone, it's like there's shame that there's something wrong with your mind. Whereas if you've got a broken leg, it's very easy for someone to see, oh, I've got a broken leg, of course I'm going to go see a doctor. But if, you're really struggling with depression, it's kind of like, oh, you should be able to fix it yourself. It's like, well, not necessarily. There needs to be a reform in the education system that if you asked every single student, asked every single parent, asked every single teacher, would you want your kid to be taught an hour a week on emotional literacy and emotional intelligence rather than an extra geography or a math or an English lesson? Every single teacher, every single student, every single person would say yes. Knowledge is knowing, wisdom is doing. Most of us are pretty smart. Most of us are quite knowledgeable. We know that we shouldn't drink Coca-Cola because it's bad for us, but a lot of us do it. It's not a knowledge problem that most of us have. It's a wisdom problem. It's a, action problem. I had this conflicting sort of thing going on where my mum was kind of like, get over it, you're a man. And my dad was struggling and was kind of fearful to ask for help or shamed when he asked for help or wanted to see a psychologist or a marriage counsellor with my mum. So I kind of had this conflicting sort of thing. This is just in hindsight, where I almost had this fear of,
Cooper Chapman, mate. You are an ex-pro surfer, founder of the Good Human Factory, mental health advocate, and a ultra marathon runner, I believe. Anything you can't do, mate?
Oh, there's many, many things I can't do, but you just named a few of the things that I have done, and yeah, I'm looking forward to having a chat today, my man.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, firstly, I'm repping the jumper, and so thank you for doing what you're doing with the brand, and I'm so keen to jump in and chat to you about the Good Human Factory and the ethos behind that, what you're doing. But I must tell you about some of the awesome conversations that I've had from this jumper. And for people listening, on the back, it will ask the question, what are you grateful for? And I'm keen to hear how you even thought to come up with that, because walking through Burleigh, and we had the Snapper event, and I had so many people come up to me and either say that they loved the jumper or that they needed to hear it. I had some beautiful conversations with some amazing people. And I think they hit both of us up on some social media and thanked you. So thank you for doing what you're doing and creating the space for people to have great conversations.
No, cheers. I appreciate it. I appreciate you rocking it today and wearing it out and about. It's really cool, the merch side of the business that I created, the Good Human Factory. I just know that I always got told from when I was a kid, my dad always said to me when I was a sponsored surfer, you're a walking billboard for this brand. That's your job. I don't know why I brought that up, but the reason why now with my own merch, I look at merch as a way to give a message. So often people just buy shirts because it looks good. I'm like, you're literally a walking piece of advertising, so why not have a message that might positively affect somebody else? So when I first came up with the ideas for my merch, it's all well and good to have your brand name and have merch promoting, go and check out my website, but I wanted to make impact when I started the idea of doing merchandise, and obviously mental health is such an important topic, and that's the space that I'd found myself in with the Good Human Factory. And I was like, what can I do with bits of merch that can maybe make an impact? And the anecdotal evidence and the amount of people like you that have been like, oh, it started a conversation, it's changed my day, is so powerful. And the very first day I ever got the merch, so one of the things that I have on a lot of my shirts and a lot of my merch is be kind to your mind, the simplest little sentence. And the very first day that I ever created my merch, I was like, I got the box of samples, and I was driving down to the snow with my mate Alex Hayes, and we're going snowboarding, and we're sitting at McDonald's of all places, as you do on a little road trip.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there, and I was wearing the shirt for the first time ever, first sample one, and this guy kept looking over at us with his family, and eventually come over and said hi, and was like, oh, my son noticed you and your friend Alex from social media, just wanted to say it's really cool what you guys do. And I was like, oh, thanks so much. And then he said oh, where'd you get your shirt from? And I was like, oh, what do you mean? And he's like, oh, that be kind to your mind, so cool. And I was like, oh, I actually just made it. This is my first ever day wearing it. They're going to be on sale hopefully in the next couple months. And he's like, oh, I just wanted to let you know I really needed that message today. I struggle a lot with anxiety and depression, and I just needed that reminder today. So thank you. And I was like, it's crazy the impact that just a little sentence can have at the right time for someone. And that's why I love the hoodies, what are you grateful for? I have another one that says good human receipt. It just kind of creates a bit of reflection. And if you can, and I'm sure we'll probably get into it today, gratitude's something super important in my life, and now understanding the science behind it, the, release of serotonin, oxytocin in our brain, if because of my merch I can have thousands, millions of micro moments in people's brain being a little bit happier, then like how cool is that? So yeah, that's kind of the reason behind the merch, and I love all the stories I get from people wearing it, the impact it has.
Yeah, and it's just been fascinating. I think it also looks awesome.
Yeah, and they're comfy too. It's
super comfy. Because it was our mutual mate Carl Robbo who first represented it, and he was wearing it at work and at Surfing Australia, and he was like, mate, why aren't you wearing this? Like, this is like right down your alley. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll get you some more. I've got some more cool
stuff.
Oh
yeah, no, I appreciate it. I try and rep it as much as I can. And I think that's a big part of it is giving permission for people to have these conversations. Especially males, I think, in particular, like you speak about the father and the son there, is that it's okay to have these conversations, and having these conversations can lead to really wonderful outcomes.
Absolutely. And I was just listening to your podcast with Jace Patchell on the drive here, like a big fan of his work and such a big fan of your work. And I think the mental health space is quite interesting. There's so much emphasis on helping people with mental illness and obviously catching people almost like in a net when they're really struggling, which is where I see the work that you both do is so important. And obviously you guys both work in high performance, so you're working in the performance space as well as the crisis space. But the way that I see myself in the, I guess, mental health industry is really like the first step. Like I didn't really relate to but the Are You Okay days and like It Ain't Weak to Speak, and really like helping your mates when they're struggling is so important. But the way that I see my merch and the message that I really share is kind of that first step. Like, let's start with a positive thing. Like, if you're not really ready to open up and share those struggles, which, I mean, a lot of us find it hard to do, maybe we can start with like, oh, well, this is the good things going on in my life, talking about gratitude, or like, hey, like, just like positive conversations, I think, are just as important as the vital ones, which are when people are in crisis. So I think if we can have more of those conversations, it can just open up like the world to be a kinder and happier place. Yeah, definitely. It's there's something to be appreciative of, or there's something to find gratitude in crisis. And like even when you say that, I think if I was talking to a client around when we're working out, are you in actually major depression? Looking at the different disorders, it's going. Can we differentiate between that? Can you find some positivity, some enjoyment, some satisfaction out of what you're doing, or is life just really difficult and shitty for you right now? Yeah. Because sometimes life is just really tough and difficult, and you're not depressed. You just it's going through tough. A challenging time, and you're a bit lost and whatnot. So I think that's a big thing. It's because in every certain time you can sort of display some of those symptoms and characteristics, but to differentiate if it's just really, really difficult right now, and do I actually have some people around me that can help me move through it? For sure. I think that's a big part of it as well. And yeah, I'm really interested in the work that you're doing in this space, and how you're advocating for that. But I'm curious what influenced your passion for this mental health advocacy space. Because I don't think I've actually heard the story of how you got into it. I mean, it's kind of everywhere, the story. A lot of people have heard it, but I'd love to share it with you. Obviously, being a psychologist, a mate of mine, and kind of becoming a mate of mine right at the tail end of my career. Like, we never really worked together professionally in the space like I did with Jason Patchell a lot. So I guess my story goes a bit like this. I had a family history of mental illness. My dad lost a brother. I lost an uncle to suicide when I was quite young. I then watched my dad throughout my teen years struggle a bit with his own mental health, a bit of depression, anxiety, alcoholism, and I had this like conflicting sort of thing going on where my mum was kind of like, get over it, you're a man. And my dad was struggling and was kind of fearful to ask for help, or shamed when he asked for help, or wanted to see a psychologist or a marriage counsellor with my mum. So I kind of had this like conflicting sort of thing. This is just like in hindsight, where I almost had this fear of potentially getting a mental illness like the men in my family, or this fear of asking for help because my dad somewhat got shamed by it. So I think that was like a big catalyst for why I was always very curious. What things can I kind of do? I was always like the guy, I wasn't the most talented junior athlete, but I did have a lot of success, and I put it down to the fact that I was quite open-minded to what little things can I use to get my mind ahead of the competition. I never had any intention of, working in this space at all, but it was something that I'd always somewhat pride myself by using my like brain to solve problems in heats, but also in the psychology side of sport. I was always fascinated by it. And then back in 2019, I think now, 5 years ago now, I was traveling the world, surfing professionally, living a pretty extraordinary life. Don't get me wrong, like I'd lost my sponsor, I was working full time, I was like grinding my way around the QS, but life was pretty good. And then my younger sister I've got 3 sisters, and my youngest one was in her last year of high school down in Sydney, and she came home from school one day and we're sitting around the dinner table like we do every single night as a family. And yeah, Sophia, my younger sister, lets us know that a boy in her year had taken his life. And I was just like, visibly, I think, to my parents and my sister and that, like quite shook. Like hearing of youth suicide is just so dreadful. And I did what most of us do. I kind of looked up some of the stats around mental illness, which I hadn't for a long time, and went, wow, this is a big problem that we have here with suicide rates and young people and men especially. And I chucked up an Instagram story and wrote a platitude, and life went on. And 2 weeks later, we're sitting around the dinner table, exact same situation. Mum, dad, 3 sisters. And Sophia, my younger sister, lets us know another boy in her year had taken his life. And that was when I was just, I remember it so clearly, sitting there just being like, almost like pissed off. I was just like, fuck, I'm like traveling the world surfing, and there's these kids in my local area that are doing the unthinkable. So I kind of made it my mission that day. Maybe I can, for one, like upskill and educate myself more in this space, whether it be through reading plenty of books around self-development and understanding the mind and the brain and this more. And I guess the first step was I went and spoke to my old school teacher. And I was like, mate, like, did you hear about the kids at the other school? And blah, blah, blah. I would love to maybe come and talk to some of the kids and share with them some of these things that I never learned at school. And I just sort of, it was good to talk to you about this actually. So I'd just done the Surfing Australia Olympics training camp, our very first ever Olympic selection camp, I guess it was. It was like
this is 2019.
It might have been 2018.
2018.
Might have even been 2018. I'd done that just before this had happened. So I'd done this training camp, and like I was never going to make the Olympics, but I did good in Japan the year before. So I was like the one person that they kind of threw in with like a few of the younger guys to get the experience. So at that training camp, we did some really cool stuff. Like I didn't remember until a few years later that Ben Crowe was there, who I'm like a huge fan of Ben Crowe's work now. He was there. Jason Patchell did a lot of stuff, and we had like Kathy Freeman, a few other Olympians. But I just remember really clearly one of the things that we worked on was our personal philosophy. I don't know how serious everyone else took it, but as I said before, I like this sort of stuff. So I came up with my philosophy, and back then, and it's kind of still is, was through hard work, dedication and passion, being a positive influence on my peers and younger generations. It's very vague, but just this idea of working hard and being passionate and being a positive influence on my peers and younger generations. Anyway, so I had this concept of like understanding your values and your philosophy, and I'd done a lot of that work. So that was where I was like, this is what changed my life. Maybe I can go and talk to some kids at my old school and share my story and some of these really simple techniques like mindfulness and kindness and gratitude that I just remember I never got taught at school. I've learned this through working with great psychologists and working alongside some high-level coaches, but also reading a lot of books and listening to podcasts and just being fascinated by this space. So my old school teacher was like, mate, there's a pretty cool industry in public speaking, which I had no idea about. But for two is like, I'm sure the kids will really relate to you. At the time I was 25. So they're like, I'm sure the kids would love to have a 25-year-old come in and talk to them about mental health or I guess well-being, rather than maybe, no offense, but rather than, a psychologist in like a suit or something that you kind of, your general vision of what a psychologist was. Like I remember I didn't relate to that stuff when I was a kid. I'd have speakers come in and talk about like depression and anxiety and call this number. And it was kind of like, left me fearful rather than inspired. So that was, back in 2019. And since then, I've now retired from professional surfing and I talk to kids and corporates and, just share my story pretty much full time and continually learn through speaking to experts on my podcast like you've been on and try and find the most beneficial bits of information for me and then just share it to people and try and synthesize it into bite-sized bits. But I guess that's a bit of the story about how I found myself doing what I do. It just came from my sister losing some friends and wanting to try and make an impact where I could.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful story because it's interesting because there's a lot of people that have been affected by that sort of stuff. but not everyone makes it their mission to go out there and change their life of what they're doing to then try and change others.
Mm.
And I know that you say that, my ethos is that I work hard and stuff, but it's very special because not many people actually go out and do it, because I'm sure there's some difficulties and some trials and tribulations to get all this stuff up and going. Because as you said, like you're a pro surfer at the time, and you'd been exposed to some of the mental and psychological work. But was there some upskilling, or at what point did you go, no, I have to then make this my mission?
I think it comes from like this weird underlying guilt that I've always had to be an athlete. And you're probably the perfect person to talk about this about. Here we go, we'll jump into the session. But no, I just think I've always had this like, why me feeling of like, why do I get to travel the world, go surfing with my friends, get paid to do it, have all these people around me trying to help me achieve my dreams and my goals? Like that's really quite often what an athlete is. Like it's a pretty selfish endeavor, and everyone around you is trying to support you to be the champion, which I think is amazing, and I loved every minute of it. But I also started to, I guess, question it a little bit when I was sort of in my mid-20s and lost my sponsorship and didn't have the support. I was kind of, had this like guilt almost of like, why does everyone else have to go and get this job that you hear them complain about, and I'm living this incredible life? So I think that's like a weird underlying theme maybe as to why I felt this urge to go into this space of helping people and giving back. But I can't remember what book it was in. That I want to say it's The Mountain Is You by Brianna Weiss, but I might be wrong. But I just remember reading somewhere that we kind of like climb these two mountains in life. The first one is kind of for yourself, and you get to the top of it and realize, actually where fulfillment is over at this bigger mountain, and that's the mountain of service, of helping people, of giving back. And I just kind of was exposed to that, luckily, I guess, from a young age, and I just put the two and two together, feeling guilt that I've got these amazing opportunities, and now like let's use those to give back to other people who haven't had those opportunities. So I think that was kind of a bit of a crossover, that I've learned all these incredible things. And I think just the catalyst of mental health made sense because, of what happened with my sister. So I kind of just married together, I guess, a bunch of things. And also the fear of like, what am I going to do after surfing? Yeah. Obviously, after athletic careers, there's a lot of challenges for a lot of people. Like I'm 25 years old at the time. I didn't have, any real further education. I'd done like a frontline management TAFE course. But I didn't really, have much more behind me other than I could ride a surfboard kind of well.
Yeah.
So that was sort of, it all married together in this space of like, okay, maybe I can share my story, continue my learning, and then, be this sort of first step in this journey of mental health. There's obviously such a continuum with mental health all the way down to mental illness. I know I'm far from qualified to work one-on-one with people, and I never have, probably never will, maybe one day will. But I'm more so about continually learning myself and being that sort of first step for people to go, maybe I can go look more into this topic. I heard about it from Cooper. Let's go look into more experts in this field. Like I want to be that conduit of information almost for people when it comes to, I guess, well-being and being open to trying new things for their mental health.
Yeah, and it's such an important service. You use the word service because it is a fantastic service that you're doing for the community. I think the biggest part is you touched on earlier with the barriers that your father had with utilizing psychological services was almost this shame that there's something defective or something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And I feel that the service that you're doing is, we use that word, permission, that people can look into it and provide support for it. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing defective that you're doing it. And the analogy that I kind of like that I've spoken to some clients about is like going, like, why do you go see your GP? Most people say, well, actually, I'll ask that. Why do you go see your GP?
Because they're experts in health.
They're experts in health, and you might have something that you're not quite sure that's happening with your health. That you're going, my ear's a bit achy. I don't really know. Yeah. Going to go see the GP. He's an expert in health. She understands what's going on with my body, and I'll get some insight, and then we've got some direction of what to do. And there's almost this understanding, and it's not questioned. It's just going, oh yeah, it's very natural and normal. There's no shame in it of asking for help if I don't quite know what's going on with my physical health. And I'm going, also on that is this appreciation that it goes up and down. Sometimes you get sick and it's just minor, and sometimes it's a little bit more, and then you might need to go get some antibiotics or whatever. But there's this total appreciation that there isn't just this linear line upwards, that there's this ebb and flowing.
And so quite often it's not your fault. It's the environment around you.
Yeah, it's seasonal flu.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? But then with mental health, I'm going, why can't it be the same, that we appreciate that sometimes it dips and sometimes we're really high, and that sometimes you don't know what's going on. So the idea is then, hey, sometimes it might be good to speak to a mental health expert, just like you would speak to a health expert with the GP, to understand what's going on with you, because we can't see. Sometimes you can see physically quite easily, but it's kind of hard to see mentally. And I think that appreciation of going, hey, it's one organism, there's health and there's mental health, and one influences the other. Yeah. But let's make it more acceptable to go, oh, I don't really know what's going on, and chat to someone. And, okay, I might get some insight there and learn more about this, and then I can then go make my life a better life. That I think gets missed. And I'm curious if you've got any thoughts of why there's such a disconnect between, oh, that makes sense with my physical health, but not with my mental health.
I don't know. I think it's quite an Aussie thing as well. Like, I ran into someone down the beach in Manly a couple of months ago who was Argentinian, owned like the bike store or something, and I don't even know how we're talking about it, but we got to talking where he's like, yeah, men in Australia don't really like to go get help. He's like, pretty much probably 5 out of my 7 best mates at home in Argentina all see a psychologist regularly. So when I heard that, I was like, it's so fascinating. And then as well, it's so fascinating that Australia, like, per capita is like second most prescribed anti-anxiety and anti-depression, like SSRI medication in the world. So like, yeah, I don't know why there's that holdback for Aussies, and especially, I guess, Aussie men. I guess the system is something to do with it, how hard it is sometimes to get in to see a psychologist, and that disconnect that it takes a couple psychologists sometimes to find someone that you can connect with. So like, there's obviously a few barriers to it. And then I think it just comes back to like what we're just going off, that by going to see someone, it's like there's shame that there's something wrong with your mind. Whereas if you've got a broken leg, it's very easy for someone to say, oh, I've got a broken leg, of course I'm going to go see a doctor. But if, you're really struggling with depression, it's kind of like, oh, you should be able to fix it yourself. And it's like, well, not necessarily. Having someone, when I saw a psychologist last year, the greatest thing that he told me, he was like, going to a psychologist is like you and your whole life is inside a jar. Going to see a psychologist is like someone to read the wrapper on the outside of the jar to let you know kind of what's actually going on, because we're so insulated in our own reality so often that we don't get that outside perspective. And that's what I've found, seeing a psychologist really helps, just like someone to like zoom out on you for a second. But yeah, I don't know what the barrier for men is in Australia. I think for one, now the cost of living is just so high to be able to like, and one of the first expenses I'm sure that people drop is, well, I'll cut going to a psychologist because I can't afford it. So I think there's many factors to it. And that's why like I'm so passionate. Like, I know it's so important to really push to get people to see psychologists, but going back on my own fear, like I kind of had that fear of like, my life's bloody perfect. Well, who am I to go and see a psychologist when I'm struggling? So I can't I can't speak to people like from experience. Like, I've struggled to want to go and see someone because of the shame that my life is great. Why would I go and see a psychologist? So that's why I'm so passionate on like, okay, well, what are the things I'm doing then so I don't slip down that scale to maybe get to that really tough position? And
you say like that shame, is that the shame that you're taking a position as someone who needs it more that should see the psychologist, or is it that you don't have a right to see someone because really your life is good? Or?
I guess that, and I hate to say that because I know it's like so contradicting to like the work that I do and the encouragement for people to seek help and the, knowing that mental health doesn't discriminate. But I just have always still felt that, and that's why I'm so passionate about like, I know if I get to that, really dark place, I'm absolutely open to seeking help, but I'm also very curious as to, okay, well, what am I doing to contribute to me falling, I guess, down this spectrum of mental health, and what am I doing to contribute moving me up that spectrum? And I just feel like so many of us are living in a place of surviving right now. Let's call it, we've got a spectrum out of 10 how we're feeling. I ask these questions to my communities that I run on social media, like, how was your day? And very common, the answer is like 4, 5, or 6. So it's like, how do we go from surviving to thriving more often? And I just feel like there's so much great data and evidence and techniques out there now that are scientifically proven to make us feel better. But most of us aren't doing it. So that's where I'm like, okay, what are the proactive things that we're really doing? Like, mental health awareness is at an all-time high, but the numbers are getting worse. People are, still struggling. So I think it's time to go from awareness to action.
That's such an interesting point, that mental awareness, so people being aware of the concept, people being aware of mental health in general, has never been as high. So that's the whole "are you okay" thing. Yep. But why do you feel that the impact of that or the rates of mental illness are increasing?
That's such a hard question. It's a $1 billion question, right?
You up there,
no. And as well, like, speaking from someone who is far from a qualified professional, but someone who obviously is in this space quite a bit. I mean, I think the first and foremost is our education system is somewhat failing us. I think there's a lot of the things that I find are really challenging are because we have a lack of education in, like, emotional awareness for one, emotional intelligence for two, financial literacy. I think so many people end up in a difficult position mentally because they're in a really difficult financial position. And I think we're just so undereducated in this at school. Like, I feel like I'm a pretty switched on smart guy, and I get so confused about tax time. I get so much anxiety and fear about tax and about investing and about cost of living rising. So I think it starts with, like, it's an education problem is a big reason for it. Like, schools, that's why, it's obviously not blowing my own trumpet, but I go to schools and talk to kids about this stuff, and so many of them are unaware of the most basic things that I talk about around gratitude, mindfulness, breathing through your nose, not through your mouth, like all these really minor things that I take for granted that I've learned. I share this with audiences all the time, and they're, like, so unaware of it. So I think like there needs to be a reform in the education system that if you asked every single student, asked every single parent, asked every single teacher, would you want your kid to be taught an hour a week on emotional literacy and emotional intelligence rather than an extra geography or a math or an English lesson? Every single teacher, every single student, every single person would say yes, but we're not doing that yet. So I just think that's something that I'm actually really passionate about, potentially doing some stuff with legislation with the state and federal government around well-being. Like, I'm not the expert, but if I can advocate to get better education in the literacy of emotional well-being and just being kind to each other, like bullying is obviously so bad, but I feel like if we had some better role models and education in that space, and I don't think it's a teacher thing either. I think there needs to be a whole new space for education in schools rather than like, oh, there's a counsellor you can go see if you're struggling. It's like, well, let's teach that a bit more at school. So that's probably my first place that I think we're missing the mark is the education system. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely, mate. And the bit that I really get from that is when you say that emotional literacy. That's so important. And because what I can tell you is that, you know how I spoke to you about on your podcast about my work when I was working clinically before surfing out in rural Queensland. And what was really interesting is firstly the unique challenges for our outback and rural communities. And what I found with working with youth there in this mental health space as a psychologist was there was such a lack of vocab to describe and articulate what they were experiencing. And us in the city, we very much take it for granted. But I think to your point across the board for young people is that if we don't have a language or an understanding of adequate language to describe what we're feeling, it's very hard then for us to get some distance from these really strong emotional experiences. And it sounds, because I guess a lot of us through life kind of learn this, but for kids going through all these difficulties, if you don't have the ability to actually put into words. Because if we nerd out for a second, it's like if we look at the limbic system in the mid part of the brain here, where all these emotions are stored here, and that's, you got your amygdala, so you got this threat detection. So there's this really strong primal force of what's happening. If it sits back there and we don't know what it is and we can't describe it, then it's having a huge influence over our biology. But being able to articulate stuff is using the front part of the brain, the frontal cortex there, to go, okay, hey, I'm putting into words. Like, language is just a made-up thing that we've had, but it enables us to understand and get distance and appreciate this strong, primitive biological stuff. It's part of the reason why I think a lot of people feel to some degree better when they talk through their problems. It's like, yes, because you're rationalizing the irrational emotion that's going on inside of you.
Well, and by communication, we create connection, and then without communication, we can't create connections. Without connection, we can't create community, and it's like that's what we long for biologically as humans. So it's like being able to communicate effectively is so important, and we're just missing that mark, I feel, so much with young people. But I just read, just going back to, I guess, the question of why do I think people are struggling and why is it getting worse, I just read Dr. Daniel Amen, guy from over in America, book called The End of Mental Illness, and he's like a neuroscientist and clinical psychiatrist and psychologist, but he scans everyone's brain, and it was fascinating learning how he says that mental health issues are brain health issues, and he's scanned more brains than anyone in the world, and he goes through all these scans and shows like all these I'm going to butcher like all the different things, but it's like how sleep affects it, how toxins affect it, how your environment, how exercise, how like everything affects our brain, which then affects our mental health. And so often the field of psychology has been clustering symptoms to give a diagnosis, whereas his is all about scanning the individual's brain and finding like what parts aren't working, what parts are. It's fascinating. You got to read it, because he then goes through hundreds of cases where they've changed diet or changed toxins or hormone replacement or nutraceuticals or SSRIs, like all these different basically things that you can do to improve your brain health, which then in turn improves your mental health. And I think that's like a big one too. The whole industry is like, wait till someone's struggling, here, let's get a Band-Aid on it, where his is all about like I interviewed a neuroscientist a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, is like exercise is like the most important thing for your mental health. It's the one thing that can grow our amygdala, the amygdala neurons fastest, like through exercise, through neurogenesis. Is like exercise is the best way to do that. Exercise and diet, the two most important things. And just because the cost of living, everything is getting harder, they're the first things that go, is our diet and our exercise, and it's just like contributing to the mental health crisis. So another little tangent there, but good book to go read. It's super interesting.
Well, for sure. I want to highlight that point there. Because there's been a lot of research of late comparing the efficacy of SSRIs to different interventions, and it's not that they don't work. They certainly do work in certain cases. But the research that I'm aware of is most effective in conjunction with exercise. But there's also research that shows exercise interventions can be as effective, if not more effective. And the reason there, and I remember doing this webinar series during COVID on it for our Outback communities. And it's really interesting because we talk about serotonin, and a lot of people know of the neurotransmitter serotonin, the feel-good, happy hormone, and but exercise actually shunts tryptophan into serotonin, so it has a very much a dose-dependent effect on your brain's ability to experience serotonin and have a lifting in mood, as well as there's endorphins and BDNF and a few different other things that influence it. But the more we research exercise, and we were designed to move. Yeah, I think the more and more research comes out that it's just one of the best things you can do. It's just finding the ways that work well for you to do it. And then you've got diet there, and we know that 90% of your serotonin is produced in the gut. and about 40 other neurotransmitters, and there's more neurons going from the gut to the brain than the brain going to the gut.
Yeah, wow.
So, I mean, and we won't go into the nitty-gritty
Don't
of
get
that,
too
but I'll
sciencey,
just
but-
underline exactly what you said there. It's so important to give yourself the best chance of being happy and healthy.
Definitely.
Through that. So I'm curious what you're doing now, mate, with the Good Human Factory. Like, what have you got on the horizon? What's the plans? What are you really moving into?
So I guess things are about to take a little bit of a pivot, which I'll tell you about in a sec. But my main, I guess, thing that I do is deliver keynotes at high schools, corporate groups and sporting clubs, where I just share my story, a bunch of the stuff we've spoken about today. But a big part of it is just sharing the idea of living by values. I find ever since I got exposed to this concept of living by values from Jason Patchell, actually, it just changed my life. It allowed me to anchor my identity, my self-worth to something that I was in control of rather than external validation, fear of failure, fear of rejection. It felt like I took control back, and I'm still working on this a lot, but it's trying to live by 5 strong values, which are responsibility, taking responsibility for my own well-being, my own health, gratitude, living with a grateful mindset, like looking at the optimistic side of life, empathy, being there for other people, being able to listen correctly, take on judgment, give judgment in a meaningful way, mindfulness. I think it's so important for all of us to be mindful every day, and that's just being present. Obviously there's the practice of meditation. It's something that I encourage people to take up, but don't force down people's throat, because I know there's a lot of resistance to sitting there with those thoughts that we all have so often. So I just try and tell people to start with mindfulness and just connect with what you can see, what you can hear, what you can feel, and bring yourself back to the present as many times as possible every day. And then I talk about kindness, like the research and a couple of short courses I've done around well-being. Like, kindness is such a powerful tool that we can use for our own well-being when it comes to neurotransmitters being released. When we do kind acts for ourselves, for others, for the environment, it makes us feel good. And I wasn't that aware of that up until the last few years. So I really love talking about kindness, some of the stories where I've used it and seen it make people feel really good. So I just take people through like a 60-minute interactive workshop where they hear my story, they see some excerpts from experts on my podcast who share the science behind some of the things I speak about. And then I just take them through some really simple techniques which can be, integrated into your daily life rather than having to, focus on here's who you call when you're really struggling. Like, I want my workshops to be practical for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're really struggling with your mental health or you're in a great spot. Like, everybody can benefit from the 5 values that I just spoke about. I then have another workshop which is kind of more gratitude based, which is a really kind of deep dive into how to, practice gratitude, how to show gratitude to others, and do a meditation around gratitude. And then, so that's kind of a big part of my business is my keynote speaking, I guess, is the main thing, what you'd call it. I then have a podcast of my own, which I've done. Geez, it takes up a lot of my time. I was thinking about it the other day. Like, I've done 2 or 3 episodes a week for almost 3 years now. It's been around for 4 years, and I had some people help me for the first 20 episodes, and it was kind of a bit janky, the first 20 episodes. But since episode 20, I'm on episode 165 guest, but plus another like 200 of other episodes. So I do a guest episode a week and a short episode a week, and I've done all the editing of that by myself for 2 years. So that's like crazy consistency of weekly, weekly, every day. Like,
super impressive.
Every week I have to make sure I've got 2 edited and distributed and recorded. Like, that's the other thing. It's finding the time to have a conversation with someone new every week. Like, we're sitting here doing this today. It can be really tricky to maintain frequency of guests. So that's a big part of what I do. Good Humans podcast. I then have a few other sort of social media community things around gratitude and mindfulness, giving people a place to come and get that daily accountability. And then I do the merchandise as well. So there's lots of little things that keep me busy, but something that I'm actually really excited about, where I'm kind of starting to pivot a little bit towards just accidentally, is working in the mental health and climate space. So there's something like 67% of young people have climate anxiety, they're calling it, have like not much hope for the future when it comes to the climate, which makes sense. Like, the climate is in, shambles with a lot of things and a lot of the data and studies that are coming out. So a friend of mine who's the UN ambassador for the environment for Australia, youth environment ambassador, this guy Cal, he wanted to leave he's only 24, he was the general manager of Delphina Swimwear for like 5 years, like real business savvy, but big ambassador for the environment. So we had been doing these be kind to the environment, mental health / climate education workshops for young people, how to take action and mobilize to be able to take climate action. So we've just been given some funding to go up and down the Queensland and then hopefully New South Wales coast, delivering a workshop that's like mixing in mental awareness, like mental health, but it's just going to be like me talking about awareness of the environment, so which is mindfulness, and then gratitude, appreciation for the environment, and then action for the environment. So we're calling it like the AAA method of awareness, and then I'm going to share awareness around mental health skills, and then he's going to share awareness around the problems in the environment. Then we do appreciation, and then we do action, like what actions can we take on an individual, on a community level to take better care of the environment, and specifically the ocean, which is really cool. So we've just been it's about to be announced soon, but appointed the co-CEOs of the Youth Ocean Carnival, which is an event that we ran a few weeks ago at Luna Park with 800 students from 26 schools. But next year we've been handed it from some of our friends and sort of seniors. They want it to be more youth driven. So in June next year, hopefully we're going to be running like the biggest congregation of youth for the ocean ever in the world. So We're going to try and do like 5,000 students at the ICC, and then plus live stream it to another 20 to 30,000 in Australia and globally, to have like a 6-hour day where we're going to do a bit of wellbeing stuff around climate anxiety, but also get some expert speakers globally to share climate solutions for young people when it comes to the ocean. So that's about to take up a lot of my time. We're just like kind of working through that at the moment. So it's going to be a big balance but then Good Human Factory is going to be a supporting partner of this charity, which is the Youth Ocean Carnival, and some other stuff I'm doing with Surfers for Climate. So all this kind of work in getting better at speaking and presenting and mental well-being has found me like leading up to this really special role that I think I'm going to have in this climate, ocean and well-being space. So yeah, that's what's coming up now.
Yeah, it's fascinating, mate. Fascinating.
Yeah,
I love your work ethic and love what you're doing. And why is it particularly important to you around this ocean? Like, because there's lots of different things that people potentially could be anxious about, but why is it particularly important to you, mate?
I mean, the ocean's given me everything. I was a professional surfer for 20 years. I got to travel the world and surf because of the ocean. It's the most special part of the world, if you ask me. The ocean covers like so much of the earth. And it's the one thing that connects all of us, every continent, everyone in the world is connected. We've only got one ocean. So it's important that we all come together to, protect it. There's so much going on with, obviously like farming in the ocean, with oil mines being, like, there's just so many things. I'm not even going to start. Like, to be honest, I'm not the expert. I'm still learning a lot about this space. But if I can use my voice to make the ocean, thrive for future generations, so other people get to enjoy the incredible space that is the ocean, like I have for so much of my life, then, I feel like it's a pretty special thing that I can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what will that actually look like in the terms of the advocacy work there? Like, what will you be promoting that some of these youth engage with to help the health of the ocean?
Well, there's obviously different levels to it. There's like the individual level. So one of the big focuses one of our pillars is like plastic pollution, obviously. So trying to teach people how to, on an individual level, for one, shop with their dollar, try and spend their money at stores, whether it be clothing stores that aren't fast fashion, whether it be using a keep cup, whether it be, all the pretty baseline simple things. But the stuff that we're excited about is to teach people a bit more about legislation and sort of community level stuff. So a few of the people who I've been working with, well, for instance, Cal, the friend of mine who's doing this with me, he started plastic-free Cronulla, where he got through legislation that Cronulla now doesn't use plastic. He also got through his school that his school got solar panels on the roof, that he worked out through government grants that he could do that when he was in year 12. He got that at his school, and then 20 other schools in the state got solar on their roof because of him. So it's trying to give, and then another young girl, Sophia Skaparis, who's a friend of ours and spoke at the conference, the recent one, she was the reason that we got single-use plastic bags and plastics banned in New South Wales, because she was too young to vote, but she got over 10,000 signatures of young people saying they didn't want plastic bags anymore, which then has to be tabled at Parliament, and then it got passed. So it's trying to immobilise young people and show them that there is more solutions other than just like, using a keep cup. You can like get signatures for things that you're you're passionate about, if you're too young to vote, or just being educated when you vote, like what parties are, climate forward, what are their policies. So I'm still really learning in this space, to be honest, too. This is something quite new to me, but it's something that I'm becoming far and far more fascinated about. And if I can use my education and my voice to make an impact, then amazing. So yeah, there's plenty of levels to it, whether it be the individual, the community level, or the redesign level is something that I'm really excited about. Like obviously with plastic, there's like reduce using it, there's reuse it, but the important one is redesign. We've created more plastic in the last 10 years than the previous 70 combined.
Wow.
So like it's about slowing down the production of it and redesigning what we use. And there's so many, solutions that we can use, but it comes back down to an economic thing. So if we can inspire young minds to, think outside the square, how can we redesign and redevelop the systems that we're using to be more eco-friendly, then amazing. And that's why we're trying to educate young people, create a lack of fear of, what's the point, is kind of a lot of the mindset that young people have. And give them, the inspiration to try and create solutions to make the ocean a, sustainable and safe place.
Mate, it's fantastic. Well, I don't know how you've got time to do all this, but I love how passionate you are, mate, and you just seem to have that ability to mobilise change, which is very, very rare and I think we all should be very thankful that you can do it. Now, I'm really interested, mate, is last time we chatted, you were on this journey to do an ultra.
Yeah.
And I haven't actually had the chance to, because we've both been quite busy, I haven't had the chance to ask how you went with this ultra, because how far was it? It was
100 trail run, oh. Blue Mountains, 4,500 meters elevation. So it wasn't just like running, along the Gold Coast. It was, I pointed, it's like running from, if you live on the Gold Coast, so it was like running from the Spit back to Snapper, back to the Spit, and then back to Snapper, but doing it in the hinterland hills the whole way.
My goodness, yeah, because that elevation and change of elevation
brutal.
Is like adds so much more difficulty and length to it. So like what time were you aiming for? Like how on earth 100 Ks through those trails?
Well, I was kind of going into the unknown. The longest run I'd ever been for was a marathon here on the Gold Coast, which I did in like 4 hours and 10 minutes or something, which isn't an amazing marathon time, but that was off no training. So the longest run I'd ever been for was 4 hours. So it's very hard to predict and go, I'd love to finish in 15 was like my stretch goal. Like 15 hours meant I ran 9-minute kilometer pace the whole way, which you ask any runner, 9-minute pace is actually not that fast at all. But when you add the elevation where you're like hiking up vertical hills and going down steep declines, like 9-minute pace is like pretty bloody fast. If you got under 15 hours, I think you got like, that was like a pretty solid time. I ended up finishing like 17 hours and 15 minutes, I think. So I started at 7 a.m. and finished at 12:45 at night. So it was pretty hectic. It was a long day.
Oh my goodness, you're running for almost 24 hours. You're running for almost a whole day and running through elevation. And it's like, why? Why do that?
I just wanted a challenge. I mean, I'd finished, I guess, my surfing career and retired from competitive surfing in 2021. I'd got through 2022 really building my business and I like to have a challenge every year or two to work towards something that's more than just my work. And then, it got to the end of last year, 2023, and I hadn't done much that was too exciting for me other than building my business for a while. And I had a guest on my podcast who was an ultra runner, and he was talking to me about ultra, and I was like, fuck, do you reckon I could do it? And he was like, yeah, you should do it. It's a good challenge. And I was like, when's like a good 100K one? Because I don't know, 100 just is a sexy number, I feel like, for an ultra marathon. Like, because an ultra marathon is anything more than a marathon. You could do a 50-kilometer ultra marathon, which there was 50-kilometer at the one that I did, but I chose to do the 100.
You just go, I'm just going to double that.
So I just told him live on the podcast, you know what, I'll do it. And it was like the week after my 30th birthday. So I was like, it's a good like little psychological milestone for me to go into my 30s doing the hardest thing that I've ever done. I trained for 100 days. I did a little project, 100 days to 100 Ks. I interviewed experts in running and psychology, hence why you came on the podcast to give me some psychological tricks to achieve, something that I thought was unachievable. And yeah, I did 100 days of training, and my training built up to like the longest training run I did, I think, was like a 35-kilometer run out on the trails. It took me just over 4 hours. And then, yeah, once I got out onto the course, once I got past like the 30K mark, I was in unknown territory. I ran for 13 hours longer than I'd ever run before. So I just, I couldn't make much of a prediction. I was like, if I finish, I'm stoked.
Yeah.
I did pretty good, I'd say, up until like the 80-kilometer mark.
Yeah.
And that's where I like hit a bit of a wall. I made a small nutritional mistake, which I got told by everyone prior. That's like where you'll stuff up your nutrition, like your body with the training, you'll be fine. But the nutrition is where you can find yourself, because think about it like this, like your nutrition system, your, I guess, digestion and your energy system is like having like a little bonfire. If the fire peters out, there's nothing to give energy to your system. So the way that I got told is like, it's like, imagine you like got a nibble, sip. You got to keep putting logs on the fire to keep it going all day. At the 13-hour mark at 8 p.m, I left my last checkpoint with my crew. You get like 3 checkpoints where your crew can be there to help you out and refuel you and stuff. And then there's other food checkpoints and drinks along the way. But I left that at like 8 at night, freezing cold, in the dark, and I still had 21 kilometers to go.
Jeez.
I was like, oh, I'll be right. I was just sick of drinking and eating and stuff, like 17 hours straight of having to eat every 40 minutes, like just shit that you don't really want to eat.
So you just like nibbling on bars,
eating gels, sipping on hydrolytes, drinking water. And I left that station and I was like, oh, I'd like a 10K downhill followed by a 10K uphill to finish. And the downhill's the worst. So I did like the downhill, and I just,
What's worse about the downhill?
Because you're going like vertically downhill and your quads have to catch yourself every step. And you think when you're going down a steep hill and your like legs are sore, your quads are having to catch the weight of your body every step. So it's actually harder downhill. Right. Anyway, so I did that downhill and I just like stupidly only filled up 2 hydrolyte bottles instead of water as well. And I was just sick of drinking it. And I was like, I don't want to eat. I'll wait till I get to the next checkpoint. And I went like an hour and a half without eating or drinking. And I just like started, they call it bonking, I guess, where I just like had no energy. It felt like the fire had gone out. And I was like, I was trying to I just fed myself a gel and it took a while for it to hit me. Got to the 90K checkpoint and I was struggling, but then I like sat down, drank a bunch of Coca-Cola because there's heaps of carbs in Coke and also the sugar.
Yeah.
Ate some oranges, and then 90 to 100, I just sort of got myself home with a second last wind of energy. But yeah, it's just like freezing cold, like 1 degree in the Blue Mountains, like middle of the night, midnight, going up like a kilometer of the stairs at the 96-kilometer mark is like a kilometer climb upstairs, like crazy.
Goodness.
But yeah, I finished it, got it done, and it was a good psychological challenge. And I'd love to, I guess, share this with you. Is there wasn't really a moment the whole way that I felt like I was in a weak psychology spot, which was quite. I was confident that was going to be one of my strong points, but I just kept telling myself like it wasn't 100 days to 80Ks, it was 100 days to 100Ks, nice. And I just like kept telling myself that there was some pain and some struggle, and the only time that I was like didn't think about quitting, but I just felt like I was going to pass out was when I stuffed up the nutrition. But yeah, other than that, I got myself to the end and made it. Don't think I'll do it again anytime soon.
Yeah,
got it done.
It's amazing. So I'm really curious of the nitty gritty in there. It's because were there some barriers, because they talk about hitting some of those physical barriers. How did you move through some of those physical barriers with this strong mentality that you speak about? Like, were there any sort of tools or techniques that you had to incorporate?
I mean, there's a few just little things that I got told prior from people like yourself and other guests I had on the podcast that like helped. Like one, I got told by this guy, Josh Lynott. He said the best advice I got was when you're going somewhere you've never been, just be a tourist. So be a tourist in your own mind. So when you get to this frustration, anger, or whatever it's going to come up, you don't know what's going to come up. Just be a tourist and spectate it rather than attach to it. And like, so that was a good one. Another good one was nibble, sip, which is Lucy Bartholomew, a great friend of mine, ambassador for the Good Human Factory, but a world champion endurance runner. She was like that nibble, sip the whole time to keep you going. So that was a big one for me. And then I just like physically, when I'd hit a wall, something would be painful, I'd just tell myself, like, you didn't sign up 100 days to do 94Ks or 80Ks. Like, you just got to keep going. Like, one of the hardest psychological moments, I think, was so the first crew checkpoint was at 56 kilometers, which is a long way to get to before you see your friends and family to help you out.
Yeah.
When I got to the 28-kilometer mark, I was like, 28's a long run. It was close to the longest run I'd ever done. It's like the third longest I've ever done. I was like, I'd have to turn around and run back to the start line for me to get back to my first crew checkpoint. So I was like, all these like math equations almost that I'd do in my head, but I'd just like, you know what, just keep moving. And yeah, got through it.
Because it's a long time to spend with yourself as well.
17 hours is bloody long. Some people finished it in 30, I think was the cutoff.
Really?
Like some people finished it like sleep on the trail somewhere for like an hour and then keep going.
Really? Wow, that's interesting.
But yeah, it was pretty hectic.
Yeah, it sounds it. So what advice would you give people if they were thinking about doing some, endurance running and stuff like that? Like, because, you're very humble on it, but it's an insane feat to do 100 Ks through the, up and down and the elevation and whatnot. And you said you were so confident in your mental ability to move through it. Like, what gave you that confidence that you knew you could trust your mind through it?
I mean, I want to say preparation, but I also understand that the preparation that I did was mega sub-adequate compared to most people train for a year to do a 50 and then train the next year to do 100. So I wouldn't say my preparation's amazing, but I mean, I'm an athlete. I've spent the last 15 years training with high-performance coaches, like people like yourself and Jason mentally, but also Olympic coaches when it comes to strength and conditioning. So I felt confident in my body's ability, even though I wasn't in the best. I mean, I was probably for the run in the best physical shape I've been. I went into it with no injuries. I didn't like overtrain and go too gnarly. I was just like, I'm just trying to finish. I'm not trying to break a record. So I think the bits of advice that I'd give, for one, if you want to do something big, like build your training. I've done some athletic things prior that I was pretty naive about. I ran the Gold Coast Marathon without training and just went and did it the next day, and I was so sore for ages. But with the building and the coaching that I had going into the 100K and like each week building a bit more each week, working with coaches, I felt confident in my ability to get through it physically. So that was set aside. And then the mentally, I interviewed some people around mindset and how to overcome. But also just, I feel like I have this interesting mindset where when things get challenging, I just kind of laugh at myself. I'm like, you put yourself into this, just keep going. I don't know. I just sort of was I had no choice in my mind at all ever of quitting. I was like, nah, I'm getting to the end of this. Just keep going. I just laser focus where I didn't really think about anything, to be honest. There wasn't heaps of thoughts the whole day at all. Whenever something would come in, I'd be like, well, I've still got hours and hours of running. Just let it go. Didn't listen to music.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I gave myself, I was like, when I get to the marathon mark, when I've passed my longest run, I'll put music in as a treat. And I put it in, and then within a minute, somebody was running past and was like, oh, you Cooper, I love your podcast, and have a chat. So I took it out, did it once more, and same thing. You kind of just end up chatting to people the whole race, randomly throughout the run.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
But I love what you said there, and the point about being the tourist, but also letting the thoughts come in and go.
Yeah.
And, it's probably because of, I don't want to assume, but I would think that you've done a lot of practice around your mindfulness. And what I understand from that is not getting super hooked and attached to the thoughts.
Yeah.
And I love that idea of seeing it, being a tourist, and that's that curiosity and just being curious of what pops up. And I think, we've spoken a lot about that, is that ability to get distance and to see them for just as what they are, which is thoughts and emotions.
Yeah. I learned this one the other day. You're going to love this. I don't know if you've heard it. And I didn't know this for the run, but I was like, I'm going to use this so much. Instead of getting furious, get curious. So it's this idea of when most people get triggered and want to get angry at something, go oh, why am I getting angry at this? What's triggering me here? Why is that person get curious instead of furious? And I'm it's such a better way to attack anything, getting curious rather than furious. And it's same with our thoughts. Do they come in and we attach them and let them control us, or do we get curious? Oh, I wonder why I'm thinking like that. Especially with ultra running, everything is impermanent. The pain you feel in your ankle goes, and you're oh, I forgot that my Achilles was killing me for 2 hours before. Now I haven't felt it. And it's then my mind gets a bit it's all impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. So yeah. You like that curious, not furious?
I do, mate.
How good
I
is
do.
It?
It's the rhyming, and there's layers. You know, there's that emotional laying that we talk about, and often what we're externalizing isn't the underlying rationale or reason behind it. So I think it's great. And just for out there, I'm going to give you a quick couple things at the end here. It's like, what would be like, what's your practices and what do you really advocate? If people are listening to this and they're going, I really appreciate what Cooper's doing and what he's advocating for, and they're going to go check out your podcast for sure and all the amazing work. But what would you say is like your top 3 tips for people to improve their overall well-being?
I mean, I think the first and foremost, a bunch of what we've gone off with in this conversation, is try and exercise as regularly as possible. It's such a beautiful thing, and I'm a sucker for it, to be honest. With the work that I do right now, my exercise, especially after the run, is nowhere near where I'd like it to be, but I'm aware of that. So I think exercise is super important. The second one I'd say is try and find some moment each day to practice mindfulness and gratitude, to look at life through the lens of gratitude, like what do I have rather than what I don't have. And I think the last one, and I love sharing this one, is this quote: knowledge is knowing, wisdom is doing. Most of us are pretty smart. Like, most of us are quite knowledgeable. We know that we shouldn't drink Coca-Cola because it's bad for us, but a lot of us do it. It's not a knowledge problem that most of us have. It's a wisdom problem. It's a, action problem. So I think just try and be a bit more accountable with yourself when you're taking actions that don't live up, when you're not conscious of the choices you're making every day, then quite often we're making bad choices. So I think just being a bit more conscious of those choices and taking responsibility for our actions. So yeah, just having that quote, like knowledge is knowing, wisdom is doing, is such a good one for me. Like when you're lying in bed and you don't want to get out of bed and go do that workout, like knowledge is knowing that workout's going to be really good for you, but wisdom's actually getting up and doing it. Knowledge is knowing that Coca-Cola is bad for you, wisdom's not drinking it. Knowledge is knowing that you shouldn't be on your screen before bed, wisdom's actually doing it. Like we don't have a knowledge problem, we have a wisdom problem. So if anything after today, try and be a bit wiser.
Absolutely. I love it, mate. I love what you're doing. And I do want to emphasize how appreciative I am, and I think everyone else is, of the fantastic work you're doing, especially in the youth space. I think it's so important. I think we're going to potentially collaborate on something at the end of this week with Surfing Australia. But I just want to, for everyone out there, just want to, again, thank you for everything that you do in this space. And it's not only courageous of what you're doing, like, and we were chatting before the podcast, it's like you're actually going out there and doing it, to your point, actioning it, because there's a whole lot of people that could say things, but they don't actually go and do it. And that's evidenced by you actually going out there and running 100 Ks, and that's just a crazy feat. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, mate, for everything that you've done, and I'm sure you've had some wonderful stories of the lives that you've influenced. So I really appreciate the work you're doing. Is there anything that you want to shout out? How do we get in contact with you? How do people support the amazing work that you're doing?
I mean, first of all, I just want to say thank you to thank you to you. It means a lot coming from you. I carry a lot of imposter syndrome and fear of judgment with the work that I do. Obviously, mental health, quite often it comes from this angle of like the clinical side, and it's taken me a long time to feel comfortable in sharing what I do without the fear of judgment of like, who are you? You're not a psychologist to share this. And I hope from this conversation today, people can realize like you don't have to be a mental health expert to talk about mental health. It's just about having conversations, about opening up other parts of, our life to be able to share with people and to just be curious, like, what can I do? So for you to praise my work, it means a lot. So thank you so much.
Well, and on that, mate, it's like, just because it's like, what's the outcome that we're trying to get? And as you said earlier, it's like
people's mental health.
Yeah. And as you
the people reading the hoodie, I've got thousands of data points and, testimonials that the work that I've done has helped people. So it's like, who's to say that work isn't more important than working one-on-one with someone? It's like, if that's going to shift someone's boat 1 degree and they're going to end up in a happier place, and, I've done my job. Well,
and that's it. It's like, if there is this expert in the field that, we said earlier, that might not relate as well to the youth, it's like, what's the point of the information if you can't communicate it effectively to the audience in front of you? And clearly you have a fantastic ability to communicate very important things that are clearly resonating with your audiences. And I also appreciate that where boundaries are. you know, we've spoken about that before. It's like you are the first to say that, hey, like I'm not going to be in the realm of treating. I'm not an expert in this, but I've spoken to a lot of people, and there's this message that's very clear in this space, and I'm trying to provide it. And I think that's where some like clinicians or experts kind of miss the point. It's going, hey, how do we story tell and get this information to people the most effective way possible? And why downplay or minimize the role that just because people haven't got, you know, the letters or the titles or stuff, that they can be more effective in telling the story than some people with these letters.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a hard space to navigate, and I'm glad that you can, you know, share from that point of view as well, that there's a space for what I'm doing just as much as, you know, what the most incredible psychologists out there are doing. If you can influence the masses to make some positive changes, it's just going to make life a lot easier for the, you know, people who are really helping when people are in crisis. Absolutely, mate. So again, really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for everyone, bottom of my heart. But and so how do we find all the stuff that you're doing? Yeah, the best place, I guess, is just Instagram. It's the first place, just at Cooper Chapman on Instagram, or at The Good Human Factory. You can find the work that I do with that, or just thegoodhumanfactory.com, and you can check out the website that has info about my workshops, about the podcast, the merch, the community stuff, and the ambassadors that I have helping spread the message too. Love your work, mate. Appreciate you coming on and having a chat. Cheers, legend.